Một, hai, ba, bốn, năm, sáu, bảy, tám, chín, 10. Có tiếng rồi. Một, hai, ba, bốn, năm, sáu, bảy, tám, chín, 10. Ok chưa? Ok.
If I could ask everyone to start taking their seats, please. So the two other speakers. Thank you for joining us online.
Yeah. Where do you want us to? I'll see where.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our special briefing on the US tariffs and their broader implications, hosted by Eurocham. Today's topic has become, well, could not be more timely, and it has become a central topic among economical, diplomatic conversations around the world. And as many of you are aware, the decisions by the Trump administration to impose 46% on Vietnamese tariff, Vietnamese goods, has sent ripples across the country. And this decision, while being on hold for the next 90 days, still bring to the surface some deeper questions. How resilient is the Vietnam's export-driven economy? How can we protect the process, the progress that the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement has been made? And together, how can the European Union support Vietnam in this difficult time? So thank you for joining us today, both in the room and online, because we have lots of members joining us online as well. My name is Chi Mai Huang, and I'm a member of the Eurocham board. My background is in the aerospace industry, where I've had over 20 years of experience leading European companies operating in Vietnam. And I'm honored to serve as your moderator for today's discussion. Now, this morning, we are very privileged to have some of the excellent speakers, leaders, and experts joining us today. And they will help us to unpack what the tariffs means for Vietnam, for the relationship between the EU and Vietnam, and for the business environment more broadly. So let me introduce you our first speaker, His Excellency Julien Guerrier, Ambassador of the EU to Vietnam. And Julien, you've been working with the European Commission for almost 30 years, working mainly on international trade negotiations industrial policy, and corporate management issues. You've been in Vietnam for almost 2 years now, and prior to that, you were in charge of the directorate, developing the overall policy for the EU funding program for research and innovation. The next speaker, our very own Eurocham chairman, Bruno Jasper. Bruno is a very proud Belgian, CEO of Deep Sea Industrial Zones, one of the biggest industrial zone developers in Vietnam. And you have had well over 25 years of experience leading multinational companies throughout Asia and Europe in chemical, logistic, steel, oil and gas, you name it, and he's got it under his belt. And then joining us from the other side of the panel, and also from the other side of the globe, is Tung Nguyen, Mr. Tung Nguyen, a senior associate at Baker Hosteller, based in Washington, D.C. And you're specialized in international trade. You've got extensive experience in representing foreign government and companies in US trade remedies and unfair trade investigation. And you also advise clients on US customs law, import compliance, and trade policy. And then last, but definitely not least, Mr. Nguyễn Lương Hiền, Deputy General Director, leading the strategy consulting deals advisory services at PwC Vietnam. You've got over 8 years of experience in management and strategy consulting, and you've been involved in long-term strategic advisory projects across sectors. So just a bit of housekeeping. Our panel discussion will run for approximately an hour, and then after that we'll open to a Q&A session. And then also people joining us on the line, feel free to send in questions through the chat functions as well. So let me start with Your Excellency. Well, if you can allow me, I'll call you Julia, because your family name is a bit difficult for me. The S&P 500 lost $500 trillion in 2 days in Trump tariff sell-off. Vietnam hit with 46% US tariff, among the highest rates. China hikes tariffs on US goods to 84%, as the EU also retaliates against Trump's tariff. US tariffs on China rise to 145% after Trump's escalation. So these are some of the news headlines over the last days and even these hours. So to say that the last 10 days has been a crazy roller coaster ride is probably an understatement of the year. So what's your take on this? And then what's the EU's view on the US decision to impose tariff on Vietnam and Europe?
No, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. As you said in your presentation, Mrs. Moderator, dear Chimay, I started my career in the trade department of the European Commission, and I spent a large part of my professional life to lower trade barriers, to negotiate trade agreements, and to ensure that the multilateral trading system was functioning. So the latest developments that you've just listed are deeply worrying. And the EU is finding very regrettable the announcement by the US to impose such tariffs universally, as was announced on the 2nd of April. They were now paused for 90 days, but the uncertainty remains. And this comes on top of other tariffs that have been imposed and remain in place. 25% on European cars, 25% on steel, and this represents a large part of the exports from the EU to the US. And of course, the 10% universal tariff remains. It is totally unjustified, but it is still there. What are the consequences? You mentioned the reaction of the markets, but the consequences clearly are that prices are going to go up, in particular in the US. So it's raising uncertainty for business. It's raising inflation. It will increase costs for business, disrupt supply chain worldwide as tariffs are imposed in a diversified way across the world. And all businesses, big and small, are already suffering from the imposed tariffs. They will continue to suffer from the tariffs, from the uncertainty that has been created, including during the negotiating period of 90 days. So what are we going to do as the EU? Well, first and foremost, we will try to find negotiated and constructive solutions with the US in particular. We have a bit more time to negotiate now, and we will focus mainly on three strands. The first one is that we will defend our interests through countermeasures as appropriate. The EU has agreed a package of countermeasures already on the steel tariffs that we have paused as well for 90 days in order to favor constructive and negotiated solutions, but they remain on the table and they can be imposed if there is no satisfactory solution during those 90 days. The second strand is that we will continue to diversify our trade links. In Asia, we have already FTAs with major partners, starting with Vietnam, but also Singapore, Japan, and Korea. And we are negotiating further trade agreements with Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And in other regions of the world, we have also just agreed on an FTA with the Mercosur. We have upgraded our FTAs with Mexico and with Chile. So the second priority for us is to reinforce our trade links with those who want to trade. And the third thing we are going to do is to ensure that we deter effectively the trade diversion that will be created by these tariffs, and in particular the huge tariffs on China. We cannot allow global and Chinese in particular overcapacity to be dumped on the European market, so we will be very careful about that. So three strands of action, in addition, of course, to the negotiations that we are conducting with the US, which are defending ourselves through countermeasures, focusing on developing our trade with other partners, and ensuring that there is no trade diversion that would harm European interests.
Thank you, Julia. It's assuring to hear some clarity in the direction of the EU among all this uncertainty. And earlier on, you mentioned also some the emotion, deeply worried and unjustified, and how businesses will suffer. So that will bring me to my next question to Bruno. What have you seen? What's been the reaction among European businesses with regards to these tariffs, and any takeaways from the recent Eurocham survey? Are they also expressing concerns, especially, for example, about supply chain disruptions?
Good morning, everyone. I believe it's been very turbulent times for all of us. And in times of turbulence, we should go back to what matters most, which is data. And for that reason, Eurocham decided to hold among its members a very specific survey, aiming to gauge what will be the impact of these tariffs. The problem is that while we are having had our survey, the rules have changed once again, because we all woke up a day ago, a day and a half ago, to positive news, I'd say. And the positive news being that the tariffs have been reconsidered, and for in a window of 90 days, we will be facing only 10%. The new reality, we only face 10%. So in order to analyze the data of our survey, we should base ourselves on the fact that these numbers are based on the worst case scenario. And for us, the worst case scenario is Vietnam being punished more than its neighboring countries, having a harsher treatment in terms of tariffs than the other countries in Southeast Asia that have a comparable growth track. Now, I must say that when I got these results, I was slightly taken aback. And I'm very proud, actually, because despite the world being in turmoil, I believe the outlook of European companies is quite positive on the future ahead. They are cautiously optimistic, but of course, there are still businesses at risk. 1 out of 4 reports that their business is at risk. At risk means many things. So we tried to quantify what is the impact, and the impact that they predict is roughly 20% of their revenue to go out of the window if we would face a worst case scenario where Vietnam is punished harsher than anybody else. Not surprisingly, about 3 out of 4 of our members states that they describe these times as highly volatile. I think we can all agree to that one. But in terms of risk, 1 out of 2 believes that their activity could become at risk if the situation deteriorates any further. And that is perhaps the worst news I have to give you today based on our survey, that over time, if the situation continues, 1 out of 2 believes that their activities could be at risk. Many have already adopted defensive strategies. Running a company myself, I also want to explain, especially to the journalists among us, because so many people ask me, what are the immediate actions? A company is not a car. Go to the left, go to the right. A company is like a big ocean-going vessel. If you want to end up somewhere in a few weeks or months or years from now, it takes a long time to go a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. There is no one in his right mind who has decided over the past week, shut down a factory in Vietnam, open one in the States. It doesn't work like that. So obviously, the response time of a company is quite different than the response time of an American president who can change his mind every day. Immediate solutions are reducing costs and assessing whether or not labor time can be reduced. But none have stated that an immediate solution would be shut down a factory. So to take away the biggest fear and one of the most cited questions, no, I do not believe European companies will leave Vietnam behind. We asked also, how would you describe your current phase? And the best way to describe it is, I believe most of our members are in what I would call the wait and see phase. The new window given by us, 90 days, is just time. And time is valuable because it takes time to find an agreement between nations, as Alain, Julien described before. Normally, it doesn't happen overnight. It means, however, that our companies buy a little bit time to look at their supply chain. And I cannot stress this enough, and it will come back, I believe, further in the panel. Supply chain is what makes our industries thrive. Supply chain is the artery of the global economy. And what America has been doing, single-handedly decide that the supply chain need to shift to one country in the whole world. My personal opinion is it will never work. It does not work because somebody decides it. It works because there's an economic rationale. And it seems that the members back up this statement. And that's also very noble because all our members run companies. And companies, I believe, keep more or less the same rationale as what I've just explained to you. So overall, I would describe the situation of our members as cautiously optimistic. And the optimistic part comes from something that was most triggering for me. 1 out of 4 believes that this will bring opportunities. And that underwrites the old adagio, in any war, and let us be clear, this is a war. In any war, you have losers, but you also have winners. So I believe if Vietnam plays its cards right and the European businesses can hold fast, I believe there are also opportunities for us to be found.
Thanks, Bruno. If I may, so yes, you mentioned the results, the outcome of the survey came out just before the pause, the hold on the 90 days. How would the result, some of the elements, could it be different in your view? Would it be more, could you take out the cautiously term before the optimistic, or?
I can be the voice for the members of EuroCham, but I cannot replicate the results of a survey under new conditions. But I have to admit that yesterday morning, very early, I had an interview with a rather well-known American newspaper who came all the way to Haiphong to interview me on the very bad situation. And then we woke up and there was a new situation. And the first thing the journalist told me, said, "It must be a great day for you." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, under these conditions, China being punished harsher than anyone else, and Vietnam on par with all the other countries, Vietnam will come out of this as a clear winner." And that's one decision or one tweet of one American president, and the world has changed. So if everything would stay the same as it is today, clearly the era of rising, as Mr. Tolam describes it, is right here at our doorstep. Yes.
Unfortunately, we still have to be in the wait and see phase, I guess. So
Yes,
we
we
cannot
are.
agree on that.
It's like just before you get married, right? You've decided to stay, but you do not know yet what you get. Yes.
So we've gone through some of the sentiments from European businesses. If I may if you could look at the domestic Vietnamese companies, so Mr. Hien, how are Vietnamese companies being affected by this US universal tariffs? And are there any particular industries that you think that appear more resilient to this kind of trade volatility?
So I think, thank you for the question. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. Thank you, Richam, for the invitation. So I think, as it was said by Bruno, I think no one likes uncertainty. So uncertainty is extremely worrisome for most of the domestic company. I would say I work for two types of clients. So one is the exporters, so the one that are very export driven, and the one that are more inclined to the domestic market. So it could be thought that after this, most of the impact would be on the exporter. That's actually not true. I think you reminded in your opening that Vietnam is an export-driven economy. I would even say that you can draw a line between the evolution of the export and the evolution of the economic growth of the GDP. It's almost go line by line. But even more worrisome is that most of it is actually driven by the export to the US. Right. So very, very high exposure, which means that in any case, all the companies in Vietnam should be affected by this, by the uncertainty with selling to the US market, which has been, we need to remind it, the key driver of the Vietnamese economy. So for the exporters, right, the sentiment now is the 90 days of relief, but with everything that has been put back together with this disruption of the supply chain, I think the next 90 days are crucial for planning. So now all the Vietnamese exporters need to plan what will happen. So all the plans that have been made in 2025 will need to be rethink over. So export to the US, where would you export? And are you still competitive to export to the US? Specifically now that, as Bruno has mentioned, we have a disruption between China and Vietnam, right? So maybe it's favorable in the short term, but I guess the next 90 days is planning. What are the exports market? What's the volume? What are you going to do with the excess capacity? And what will you do with the cash flow? So that's probably what should be in the mind of all the exporters. For all the domestic company, for all the company that are looking at the domestic market, so retail company, I do a lot of deals in healthcare, in education, with a lot of investors that just literally put some money into the Vietnamese market. I think any projections of growth in terms of the natural purchasing power needs to be reduced for the next 2 years at least. It needs to be significantly reduced. So this will impact all the people that have just invested and bet on a certain pace of the Vietnamese, of the development of the Vietnamese purchasing power. This will need to be reduced in the plan, right? For Mr. Tolam put at 8%. I don't think 8% will be achievable. Right? And so I guess that's the sentiment. The wait and see, I concur the wait and see. I wish I could say things to my client. I don't have much more to say. But for the exporter, I would say that's now there's 90 days of planning to be redo. And for all the others, there needs to be a downscaling of what was the expectation towards the Vietnamese growth trend.
Thanks for your candid thoughts. I think the point about the growth projection need to be reconsidered. I think that's gonna send some signals.
If I may,
Please.
I believe we should be pessimistic about export, but I believe we should not be necessarily pessimistic about Vietnam, which is not entirely the theme of today. But Vietnam, as one of the only countries, has the spending power to beef up their growth by internal strategic projects. If they speed up the high-speed train over the next 3 years, that in itself is a few percent per year in growth alone. Of course, it will be to the detriment of lost export. I understand that. But I believe this country is so resilient that if they say they will manage 8% growth for better or for worse, and that they have seen worse times than today, I actually would back that up. That does not mean it makes it easier for an export-driven company, but the macroeconomic forecast, I put my money on 8%. But we'll talk at the end of the year.
The discussion is on record, so we'll see by the end of the year.
A Belgian beer on 8%, okay?
So we've heard all this disruptions, uncertainty, worry. What are the, how about in the US? What are the sentiments that businesses in the US are experiencing? I mean, we take advantage of having you here in the room with us, Mr. Tung. And then, so if you could give us an insight, what do you think, what the US want from all of this? Why are they doing this to the world?
First of all, thank you for your question, and many thanks to Eurocham for allowing me to be part of this excellent panel. I think what has been done in the past 3 months since President Trump came back to the White House has been shocking. We expected tariffs and we expected change in US trade policy, but not to this extent. However, there has been warning even before that, and maybe even during his first term in the office. Mr. Trump highlighted the persistent trade deficit that the US has with the world as a sign that in terms of trade, the US has been a victim of a multilateral system that took away its ability to leverage its economic powers, and that it has been treated badly by other countries and taken advantage of. And that's why he has been preparing a plan, a comeback plan to change that system. And when he first came in, he issued 2 memorandum called America First Trade Policy and America First Investment Investment Policy. America First means that America is in the center. He's not seeing the US being part of a multilateral system where it has to abide by laws, abide by the common rules and give away its leverage. So he wants to put America in the center and engage countries in one-on-one negotiation to get a better deal for America. And this means that he wants to create a wall of tariffs on imports, making exporting to the US costly and difficult. So that's why we're seeing a lot of different kinds of tariffs being put in place, and they change very quickly, making it very unpredictable for businesses. That becomes an incentive for companies to invest in the US to avoid having to deal with tariff policy. So how are US businesses reacting to this? Companies have prepared by stockpiling before, you know, even from last year. So we saw a lot of warehouse being full, and that continues to be the case as tariffs, waiting to be kicked in. Um, but the uncertainty really affects how U.S. Companies prepare for the next phase. We're seeing concerns about supply chains. Now companies are negotiating with their suppliers to increase to account for the increase in tariffs. So lots of contract negotiation. Um, but there's also that they're taking legal measures to protect their interests. There has been a court case that was filed arguing that President Trump is misusing his authority to impose tariffs. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. There are a lot of moving parts to this. Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned the legal issues that Mr. Trump is having. Are these measures, the measures that Trump's, doing with tariffs, are they consistent with the international trade laws under the WTO commitments from a legal standpoint?
Um, I, there are two angles to this. In my view, there are obvious kind of violation of WTO law in terms of the U.S. going above its agreed tariff bounds, and also violation of the MFN principle, where the U.S. imposes different tariff rates on different countries. But putting aside that question, and I think China has already challenged some of these tariffs to the WTO. But given the current state of the WTO, the question is whether or not, like, what do you try to achieve by going to the WTO? Of course, it still has the value. You put the US on the record to explain its policies and actions. But countries and companies need to also consider legal actions in the US courts, because the US only care about what US laws allow the president to do in terms of imposing tariffs. And as I mentioned, there are questions about the legality of these actions.
So, so then, what do we think in this panel here will happen in the next 2 years? I know this may seem to be an impossible question because we may not know what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time. But if we were to have a crystal ball in front of you, what would be your prediction? Maybe.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think this morning, if we take the 40 minutes we've been talking, the one word that came back more often is uncertainty. And I was quite deeply worried hearing our American friend saying even that uncertainty may be the objective on the US side. This is the opposite of what we want to do as the EU. The EU is a stable, reliable, trustworthy partner, and that's what we want to offer to Vietnam. The second thing I would like to highlight and react on is when I hear again our American friend saying that America does not want to respect international law, but wants to have bilateral negotiations where it can impose its power to get better deals. again, this is the opposite of what we, the EU, and I think I can talk on behalf of Vietnam on that one as well, are willing to have. We want a multilateral system that is stable, that ensures open and free trade, clear rules, and that is respected by international trading partners in order to have predictability, visibility, and fair competition. This is also what we are going to offer to Vietnam, and that's what we want to cooperate with Vietnam and many other partners in order to ensure that the multilateral trading system remains in place, at least for the rest of the world, excluding the US that does not want to respect it. Now you are asking what will happen in the next 2 years. I think one thing we have to keep in mind is that the US represents 13% of world trade. So there are still 87% of trading partners that by and large are willing to abide by the rules and to trade. I've said that we are negotiating more trade agreements. We want to favor the development of trade with our FTA partners like Vietnam, with future FTA partners, and ensure that we lower trade barriers within the rest of the world, including within the single market, by the way. And that can make up for much more than the lost trade with the US. Looking at Vietnam, and maybe Bruno will build up on that, but when I talk to European companies, most of them have invested here not to export to the US. Some are partly exporting to the US, but most of them are producing for the Vietnamese market, for the Asia-Pacific market, sometimes for the European market, sending back products to Europe. But they tell me that the impact of the uncertainty on their exports to the US is a relatively small part of their business on average. So that comes back to this 13% of world trade. What will happen in the next 2 years is that we have to work together with stable and reliable trading partners in order to create more opportunities than the ones that are being destroyed.
So Julien, by trade, is a diplomat, so he should not be outspoken, but I'm not. So my predictions, what will happen in the next 2 years? First, we start with the most important part. I just put a Belgian beer that by the end of the year, Vietnam will have 8%. So I will, by the end of the year, have many beers. That's number one. Number two, for the Eurocham members, I believe that we will see a very interesting phenomenon. I believe, as per what was just said, the next 3 months, nobody will have to reduce its workforce or cut costs. They will have to work as hard as possible to ship out as much as possible. So warehouse space over the next months in the States will become very expensive. And that means that the next 3 months will offer a much needed delay in increase of prices in the States, which will help Mr. Trump to convince that actually hiking up tariffs doesn't disrupt the economy, doesn't disrupt the cost of life. But my prediction is by the time I'm enjoying my Belgian beers, life in the States will be more expensive. And that brings me to my next prediction. There are midterm elections by 2026. Everybody knows this. So if this problem is not sorted by then and the pain is out in the streets, I believe that is a moment of change that we can expect. Before that moment, I do not believe you can expect any change in policy from the States. I actually believe it will have to get worse before it gets better. There needs to be pain before perhaps the policies will change. And that is the bad part of this whole story. One country has decided unilaterally to rewrite the rules. Imagine we all do this. All of our countries can ask the same thing. We will impose something on the rest of the world. The final outcome is that I believe there is a silver lining to each dark cloud. For Europe, I believe it's a golden opportunity, one that we haven't had in decades, to forge new ties with the East, to make sure that Asia becomes a close ally. Whereas for the companies that are here, it offers an opportunity to use that platform and ensure that the cost efficiency of that platform can be used for those markets they can trade with. My prediction is in 2 years from now, if there are going to be new factories in the States, those factories will only be viable because of the tariffs. That means that those companies can only produce in the States because they're protected by the tariffs. Outside contenders cannot come in. It means also if one day there are no more tariffs, those companies have a really big issue. And that means that those companies can only produce in those production platforms for the States. That is a conundrum that many multinational companies will face. And it's a real reason why not so many will blindly go into the States and say, let's go invest. So my overall conclusion is that in 2 years from now, there will have been a huge push from the United States to have a new world order that will no doubt leave the WTO behind. But in the end, if the whole world holds steady and says that they will keep their own course, I believe no country can trade on its own, not even the United States of America.
There's a common silver lining in both of your messages here, which is that there's a opportunity outside of the US, both for the EU and for Vietnam. And so that, you know, Vietnam and the EU should look at this and develop further cooperations. And so that's also a key message from Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh in one of his government meeting earlier this week, which is that, yes, the US is an important market, but certainly not the only one. And so in the next round of question, I'd like to look at the actions that the Vietnamese government has taken so far, and how just a partner like the EU can support Vietnam to stabilize trade flows. And what's particularly noteworthy and commendable is the swift, the proactive, and the measured response by the Vietnamese government. You may recall within hours of the first announcement, right? The Vietnamese got the highest level of leadership engagement directly with the US counterpart. And so from that to a clear and constructive proposal to the cabinets, to the ministries, to ease tensions, reduce tariffs, and open further dialogues. I think we all can all agree that it is a reflection of a strong leadership from the Vietnamese government. So, Julian, do you think that they are pressing all the right buttons? And what are some of the more pressing issues that need to be addressed in relation to the US tariff from an EU perspective? And yes, and again, any other recommendations or that the EU and its member states can provide to Vietnam during this difficult time?
No, thank you very much. And indeed, I think Vietnam is having the right attitude. Prime Minister Chin, in his intervention when he discussed the FTA index, said what we've been saying this morning. This is also an opportunity to diversify our trading partners and to focus on working together with our, what he calls, real good friends, those who come to Vietnam, invest in Vietnam, respect Vietnam, and are ready to create benefits and to share risks for our mutual prosperity. This is exactly what we are doing, the EU, and this is bringing the EU and Vietnam together to create more trading opportunities between ourselves based on the FTA between the European Union and Vietnam, which is already delivering, working together also to ensure the viability and stability of the multilateral trading system. And the second thing that Vietnam is doing and should indeed be doing, and Bruno mentioned it, is use the domestic leverage and ensure that the business environment in Vietnam is fostering additional growth. Vietnam is an attractive and developing market. There are impressive growth perspectives, capacity by the government and by the private sector to invest massively in infrastructure that is needed to support the development of Vietnam, energy infrastructure to navigate the energy transition towards climate neutrality in 2050 and to support the growth rates of Vietnam, sustainable transport. We mentioned earlier the high-speed train as an example, and also the digital transformation. And that's the areas where the EU wants to work together with Vietnam to support its development and its growth prospects. We are also willing to support the ongoing reforms in Vietnam that aim at reducing bureaucracy, paperwork for businesses by 30%. That simplifies the legislation, modernizes and digitalizes the administration. This is not just a very welcome development, but a development that can support growth within Vietnam. So through our Global Gateway Initiative, we will support Vietnam in that endeavor. There is so much we can do to ensure that the 8% target can indeed be reached for our mutual benefit, European and Vietnamese.
So that's what the EU plan to do for Vietnam. And how about Eurocham? What are you planning to do for the member companies? Do you have any advice?
First of all, what we will try to do as Eurocham is do what we do today. Brief you timely, bring experts in, because I believe these gentlemen also have some other points that are quite interesting to listen to, and ensure that we can be as transparent as possible on what is in front of us. Eurocham can be a voice. We are a voice. I'm being consulted on a regular basis on by the task force that is advising the Prime Minister on how to react on the tariffs. We are one voice. There are other voices as well, but we will keep raising our voice both on tariffs and, as Julian just said, on the other things that are today possibly a bottleneck for future growth in Vietnam. One of the main reasons why we have a white book and we launched it today is we should not be blind. Today, it's not business as usual, but almost as usual for the time being, for the next 90 days at least. This country still has other issues as well, big ones and small ones. There's just one person who decided to impose an even bigger one on us. But we should not be blind that in the meantime, business goes on. Eurocham as an organization should look after the well-being of its members. Those European companies that have decided to call Vietnam its home should work hand in hand with Vietnam to ensure that they can work towards a future that is hopefully resilient enough that they will no longer rely only on the American market. Vietnam has known a tremendous growth over the past years. A lot of it was driven by export to the States. A lot of it, let us be clear, was because China was left behind as the factory of the world. Vietnam was one of the benefiting countries from that. But it doesn't mean that the world stops turning if the market in the States gets more difficult to access. This country has a tradition to be resilient and to adapt itself and to win its wars. I hope that our members that have their home here can adapt in the same way and that we can hand in hand with this country in the end find the silver linings in the clouds.
You mentioned resiliency, and I think we think one of the factor will help to enhance the resilience of Vietnam is to invest in local industry and infrastructure. And obviously that will help to reduce dependence on foreign markets and boosting economic development. Any view from PwC on how Vietnam can do that to help domestic economy?
I do agree, but I think I do agree on the long-term trend that you need to reduce the reliance on the export. But the fact is, it would take time. Vietnam is still a lower middle-income country, right? So I think the easy development path is still for export and even I would say FDI type of export, which mean that I think Bruno, I'll take you on this bet. Maybe for this year, the 8% is there, right? But my worry is for the next few years, because I think the one way to predict the Vietnamese economy is to look at the FDI trend, right? The foreign investment trend, which I expect for this year will be very low, right? Because no one would invest in a major supply chain shift in this period, right? So I think in a few years, right, maybe to 26 to 27 will be difficult year for Vietnam from a growth perspective, because the FDI inflow from 2025 to 26 won't be there, right? So I think that's one thing to keep. Oh, I see, Bryn.
In which scenario?
Yeah.
In 46% scenario.
Yes.
Because in the scenario today, I can guarantee you we're sold out.
Yep. I agree, but in a time of uncertainty, you won't have new FDI, and the growth of Vietnam is still on the new FDI, the FDI inflow, which I don't think will happen in the time of uncertainty.
In uncertainty, I fully agree from a strategic viewpoint, who will invest in uncertain times. But there I need to make a big exclamation mark. We Europeans have gone a little bit slow, a little bit conservative. If I take my other hat, being in charge of deep sea industrial zones, we have 24 investment projects lined up for this year. We did a thorough investigation. Out of that 24, one company said they might be slightly delayed for this year. Total effect, $1.8 billion into the economy this year. So the FDI for this year is guaranteed that they will not stop it. Whether the one for next year and the year after will happen depends on an outcome that, in my view, for the next 90 days is one huge question mark. And if we say it will go down, I fully agree. It will go down if Vietnam gets punished more than its surrounding neighboring countries.
Yep. No, I fully agree. Right. I think in this environment, the thing is, luckily for Vietnam, there were a lot of investment committed. So I think this will happen, right? Because you cannot change the plan that has been decided for a few years. But now, any companies that was in the thought process of relocating a major manufacturing capacity to Vietnam, I take some example of a very large Korean project that wants to move a lot of electronic parts to Vietnam. This will be delayed, I think, right? It's safe to say that at the very minimum, this will be delayed. But I do echo with the needs in investment in other parts, so infrastructure or the domestic market. I do echo that the Vietnam needs to take this chance to probably invest a bit more in this to rethink the infrastructure as a whole, social infrastructure, energy, all this. So probably there's time to do this. My only worry, right, is that being still a lower middle income country, right, there's a lot of things that won't be really that easy to achieve without a large inflow of FDI money. That's my only worry on this regard.
I'm loving the dynamics of the conversations here, and the different views shows, you know, the uncertainty reality of the situation. So
I wanted to point out for those that are looking for new markets, you do understand that whatever tariffs we will get, whether it's made in Vietnam, made in Indonesia, Thailand, they will still look how much of that is coming from China. What is the biggest weak point of Vietnam today? that its supply chain is still China driven. Now, if I would be a manufacturing guy, I believe there's a huge opportunity to start produce more in Vietnam, because then there is no Chinese component in what you're going to send out. And as a result, your tariff is a standalone tariff for Vietnam, and you do not get punished for the part that is Chinese. Today, if you would calculate the total export that goes out of this country without any Chinese contribution, it will be very low. Very, very low. And that is an opportunity for Vietnam to exploit. That is where the Vietnamese government can make a difference. If they can find measures to promote and to support 100% or 80% plus made products in Vietnam, that is, in my view, a game changer for the economy. And that can overcome quite a bit of the total value going out, but it might come down. But what you generate in this country will go up. And from a macroeconomic view, there's a big, big gap there to be filled up.
If no further comments, I think it's time for us to start taking some questions. I'm conscious of the time. We have 2 more minutes, so before the question. So
Yes. I think many things could happen, right? We have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But here are the couple of ideas that President Trump has said before the election and since the election, and also people in his circle. One is that the WTO, there is a real chance that the US will withdraw from the WTO and the world needs to prepare for that scenario. Two, they're talking about this US center system of a 3-tier with certain allies would be in, let's call it the green tier, where you would receive free trade treatment. Other countries would receive call it a yellow tier, which would be subject to high general tariffs, let's say 20 to 30%. Then you have countries of concern that would be subject to punitive duties, like China. And I think all of this being done is to get to that point where you have a clear 3-tier system. And the US will negotiate with countries, and Vietnam needs to position itself such that if this becomes a reality, then at least it doesn't fall into the group of concern. I see this reciprocal tariff as temporary. It's like a headache pill. You're having a headache. They worried about trade deficit, so they imposing reciprocal tariff to counter trade deficit. But Mr. Trump for Vietnam, he talked about specific trade concerns. One is trade with China. Being close to China, and Vietnam relies on Chinese supply chain, allows for Chinese goods to come to America without paying duties or without paying the effective duties. So circumvention of duties is one. Market barriers, with Vietnam offering to reduce the tariffs, but that's going to take time. The trade deficit is just very big and it's hard to manage. So it is possible that Mr. Trump can impose other tariffs beside this reciprocal tariff, and Vietnam needs to prepare, maybe take advantage of this negotiation to address those concerns, come up with solutions that would prevent further actions from the US. So I think that happens in the next few years.
I'd like to follow up on a question from online audience because it's relevant to what you've just mentioned. So what do you think Vietnam will do to stop transshipments, as this will be part of the negotiations between the US and Vietnam, avoiding repackaging from Chinese products with Made in Vietnam label?
I think there has to be new ideas about this, because obviously what is in place is not working. The U.S. has been moving towards a stricter country of origin standard. So for steel and aluminum, they moved from these substantial transformation standard to the country of smelt and cast, or smelt and poured. So we can expect the negotiation to involve establishing new rules of origin that would separate goods with Chinese origin from goods with Vietnamese or other origin that would not be affected from the tariffs. So it is important to have this certainty, even if that is a higher standard than what is currently in place. At least companies know what are the rules that would be in place so that they can comply with that. Yeah.
I have to react because we Europeans have a Cartesian mind, and I have difficulties to understand the logic, if there is any, because you said tariffs are there to make it more difficult to export to the US and incentivize production in the US. And now you've just said tariffs are a temporary pill to cure the headache of the trade deficit, and they will disappear. But then it's inconsistent. You will not make it more difficult to export. You will not incentivize production in the US. So which one is it?
Yes. So this is the kind of technical point. The reciprocal tariff that is being applied is imposed based on a national emergency authority, meaning that it's meant to address an emergency that is meant to be brief. So Congress can take it away, the court can take it away. There is law in Congress called Reciprocal Trade Act that would allow the president to negotiate with countries and increase the general tariff on countries of concern. What I meant that this is being a temporary measure is that President Trump will shift the authority to impose tariffs from this emergency tariff to a more permanent one. An alternative to this emergency tariff is the Section 232 national security. President Trump explicitly excluded any products subject to national security duties from this national emergency duty. And so duties will be there, is meant to be high duties to stop inflows of goods. But which authority will be used would change from time to time. And that brings and that's why companies shouldn't take these duties as given. If you export a lot to the US, you're paying a lot of duties, and you believe that those duties are unjustified, look for legal actions that you can take to get that money back. Because you're paying duties now, but if the court say these duties are illegal, then you get the refund.
Other questions from the room?
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you for sharing. My name is Andre from Bosch. Every country is very, let's say, internal oriented now and very happy. Yeah? We only get 10% tariffs, and it's like a birthday present. Yeah? But what we forget and we didn't discuss is that China and the US is in the worst trade war ever. Yeah, 100% plus, and I don't know where it's going to end. Yeah, so let's say uncertainty, the word that we used, is continuing. Maybe I don't have a question, but maybe just a statement. Yeah, what is going to happen? Is Trump going to say everybody who is a friend of China is my enemy? Is he going to do different, let's say, revenge actions to countries instead of tariffs? Yeah, tariffs are 90-day pause. Everybody happy. But vessels from China, maybe they get the 1.5 million fine if they come to the port. I mean, there's so many ways he can play, and he really likes that. So I like a reaction on that.
Okay. Good morning, Andre. Yes, yes, you're very positive. I'll try to give a balanced answer. We should be happy that we are not facing 46% today, but we should not be dancing on the table. So don't start, okay? Don't dance. And I believe the 10%, as per what we said, it's not a given. It will change. It might even not be called very soon reciprocal tariffs. It might be called something else. Normally, next week, we should expect a new announcement where all container ships sailing into an American port will be hit by either $1.5 million a ship or by $300 per container. If the ship is made in the States, you're free. The reality is it's just another tariff because there are no container ships made anymore in the States because the wharves prefer to make ships for the Navy, much better price. So I believe the reality that we face today is that we are not out of the woods. In my home country, there's a saying that says, don't count your chicken too early. We do not know yet. It can be worse than what we had, and it can be better than what we had. So that's why my short-term prediction is all those exporting to the States produce as much as you can at 10%. But what is going to come after will depend largely on the negotiation between Vietnam and the States. But that is a unilateral negotiation. And I do not know, but I believe many of you are in business. Many of you need to make a commercial agreement sooner or later. You can only make a good, decent commercial deal. And the man himself wrote a book, The Art of a Deal. He writes it himself. The deal can be made to your advantage if you know what the other guy wants. Now, tell me, what does he want? More rare earth materials? More sales of his military equipment? More political power? Destroy the WTO? Ensure that the EU will fall apart? Make sure that Vietnam will choose the side of the States and not China? The list can be very long. God knows what the man wants. He's the president of the United States of America, and apparently he can decide what he wants. I believe the only way for us to overcome this kind of uncertainty is to reuse the same words: diversify, resilience, and ensure that you have the most efficient production platform in the world. Because like I said, even if one day people start relocate factories, if they're protected under tariffs, they will only work in one country. And for me, if you look back into history, which is about time we all start doing, there's not one civilization that ever got more than short-term gains out of tariffs. Protecting your own industry is making it fat and lazy. So for me, a good morning to you, Andre, but I believe we are not yet there, okay?
Thank you. I think the question raises a very important point, which is China. The trade war between China and the US has the potential to affect global growth, and that will affect all of us. And perhaps more importantly, I think beyond the current volatility of tariffs and decisions on the US side, the competition between China and the US is a deeper and longer term phenomenon that was there before the current administration and that will remain after the current administration. So we received feedback from EU companies based in China, and what they are telling us is that already before all this turmoil, their policy was to focus their production in China for the Chinese market and produce outside of China to the benefit of Vietnam, very often in Vietnam, for export markets. And what's happening now is just accelerating this trend. So I would support also the advice of Bruno by saying one thing that would be certainly positive would be for all of you to ensure that you are not too reliant on Chinese supply chains.
So in your answer, I think you've also addressed a question from the online audience, which is that in case of the flood of Chinese and Vietnamese goods rerouting to the EU, the question is whether or not the EU have to consider actions to protect local businesses and industries that have been impacted by tariff with the US. Not to mention that regulation and standards for products into EU markets are typically higher than into the US one. And just investment on R&D innovation must be considered for long-term diversity and trading improvement with the EU. So just to share with the audience. So yes, question.
Good morning. Koen from Deep Sea. I'm obviously very tempted to ask a question to my boss, but I will not do it. Actually, I have... No salary raises today. No. That we discussed already. I have more of a question for Julien. What we see happening right now is a kind of a me first sentiment or attitude among many countries. At this moment, 70, 80 countries are lining up in front of the White House, all trying to bargain the best deals for themselves. It's every country for itself at the moment, with no specific attention to what the rest of the world actually needs. So we are talking about here uniting, creating a coalition to fight against the US. But in order to have that coalition across countries and across continents, you need someone who is leading. We exclude China. We obviously exclude the US. Russia, probably not. Is the European Union ready to stand up and take its responsibility and lead a coalition of the willing, fighting for a fair trade system around the globe, knowing how internally fragmented the European already is? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't use the terms coalition or ganging up, but in everything I said this morning, indeed, I believe that we need to unite between countries that believe in the multilateral trading system, in open and free trade, and to defend our principles. We are coordinating with Vietnam on that, with many other countries. There is also a second element in your question. You're alluding to a kind of beauty contest where everybody would go to Washington and try to get the best possible deal. We have to make sure that this is not done at the expense of what Prime Minister Xi calls our real good friends. We need to ensure that it is more beneficial and interesting to cooperate with our FTA partners, with the ones who want to trade with us, and that the conditions for business investment, exports and imports are better for FTA partners than they are for people who choose trade confrontation and imposing tariffs.
No other questions from the room? I'll have a question for Mr. Tung. So for President Trump's tariff strategy in the upcoming 90 days, exemptions for countries and exclusions for products possible. And for Vietnam, I would recommend to exclude agriculture, aquaculture, footwear, textile, and wood. So the question is from an audience from online. Do you have any?
I haven't had a chance to talk about what companies can do to mitigate the impact of these duties. So I'll just talk on that, and then I'll touch on what could be done in this 90 days period. Companies need to understand that there are different layers of tariffs in place, and so they need to the extent that they export to the US, they need to understand what duties are being applied on to their products and monitor the change because it changed overnight. Compliance is very important because Mr. Trump has emphasized the need to enforce these duties. He talked about having these external revenue services to replace the internal revenue services. The idea is that there will be more duties collected, and so foreign companies could cheat out of these paying duties. and he will increase enforcement. So you're in an environment where you have a lot of layers that you have to comply with, and you have to do it correctly. You have to pay the correct duties. You have to classify your products correctly, determine the country of origin correctly, doing all of that, and make sure you pay the correct amount of duties. If you don't, then there are civil and criminal mechanisms that the U.S. could use to enforce. So enforcement, I mean, there's a risk of compliance. The risk of uncertainty, as I mentioned, there could be more duties to come, so you need to diversify. You need to review your contract, make sure that there are provisions that would allow you to change price or renegotiate price should trade policy changes, and then legal actions. In terms of the 90 days, the opportunity to negotiate with the U.S., I think companies should get together through their association to work with the government and highlight their needs to access the U.S. market, to ensure that product-specific exemptions are discussed with the U.S. Because if your sector is not mentioned and is not part of the negotiation, then when there's a deal, that deal would not allow your products to be excluded. And I think product exclusion will be rare, will be hard to come by, but you need to engage early with the Vietnamese government through this process to make sure that your products could be exempted if there's a deal.
My phone is flooded with questions, but I think we only have time for one more question before I'll ask Bruno for closing remarks. But the next question for you, Julia, what is the strategy to be expected from Vietnam, especially with the very busy diplomatic visit schedule to China, to EU, from China, EU countries, etc., in the coming weeks? Vietnam has been walking a thin line between China and the US. And it seems that the US is now seeing that US is now seeing it through and appears to ask countries to choose sides. Any comment on that?
Well, there is indeed, as you say, a very busy diplomatic agenda, in particular from Europe. We had a Belgian royal visit last week. We have the Prime Minister of Spain here this week. We will have in May the French president, the Hungarian president. We're expecting this year the president of the European Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, and also the Trade Commissioner, Mr. Šefčovič. So that all underlines how much of an importance the EU gives to Vietnam in particular and Asia Pacific in general. We are doing exactly what I said we should be doing, reinforce our trade links with our FTA partners and create more business opportunities with the 87% of the world that want to trade with us. We want to pass the message that the EU is the stable, reliable, and trustworthy partner that Vietnam needs. We will not let Vietnam down. And we heard this morning, crucially from EU business, that EU business will not let Vietnam down. We have to work together for our mutual prosperity, but also for the sake of the global trading system. The fact that the Chinese are coming here as well, and that they want to coordinate with Asian countries shows that Vietnam is an attractive market and should continue to diversify its trade, business, economic, and political opportunities across the world. The current US actions indeed reinforce the need for other countries to reach out to one another. The president of the European Commission has reached out to the Chinese leader to discuss how to ensure global stability as the two major stable world powers economically. And I hear that Japan and Korea have been coordinating also with China their response to the current tariff wave. So this is actually one of the outcomes that current action has generated.
I think the message for Vietnam to diversify is loud and clear. I'm told this one more question from the room.
Question. Philippe Perruchot, Saint-Honoré. The way how to beat Trump, I think the Europeans are pretty clever in trying to hit the state that have been voting for Trump, such as Kentucky with Rand Paul, and that has been a reaction on the increase of the tariff for the Bourbon. The second part is, for example, Louisiana with soybean for Mike Johnson. So I think it's a good way, and I think we should use, because he's using a lot leverage, and we should start to do the same thing. The question mainly is the zero tariff from a proposal from the European. Is it serious, or is it the same game than Trump is playing?
Well, we are not in the business of raising tariffs, but in trying to lower tariffs and generate trade opportunities. So, of course, we very much hope that there could be a virtual cycle generated by offers of zero tariffs for zero tariffs. European tariffs are very low already, but we would be ready to go lower if we could, on the US side, get a similar treatment. And what would create a de facto free trade zone between the North Atlantic partners on both sides of the ocean. This is, by the way, a proposal that Vietnam also has made to the US to lower tariffs to zero on both sides. So we very much hope that there will be constructive trade generating agreements based on lower if not zero tariffs, rather than an escalation towards huge trade barriers that would affect all of us.
So on that, would you like to?
So we've come to the end. Wrapping up is a difficult task these days, because by the time I've quit speaking, no doubt there's a new tariff announcement. I believe that if I need to take one message away, is that we should be bracing for worse. We can hope for the best. We should be braced for worse. And I believe that bringing tariffs down is no doubt a good thing. Bringing them up is no doubt a bad thing. But we should not forget that now everybody talks about tariffs, but the game is not tariffs. The game is political power. Who is ruling the world? And a country like Vietnam cannot rule the world. And us being European companies inside Vietnam are just a blip on the radar, but we can still do things. I believe we can ask Vietnam to start making positive action. Vietnam has still power. They have tools. An example could be they can tax incentivize products 100% made in Vietnam. It's good for the country for now, for tomorrow, and for the future. If you make everything inside your product, it's derived from Vietnam, it's a step forward. It decouples the dependency on the Chinese supply chain. At the same time, it actually builds up an extra wall if new tariffs are coming on the future battle, I believe. What is the real origin of your product? And I think that is the direction that a lot of countries can go. And that means that a lot of countries will have to look clearly inwardly and see how can you reinforce your own economy without destroying the global economy like Mr. Trump is trying to establish. In terms of turmoil, security is an absolute must. Security we can find within ourselves by holding steadfast on our strategic course. And if that means that we have, in the end, adapt our strategy and believe that the consumer market of the States might never be the one that we knew, we will have to accept. And my own recommendation, based on what I hear, is we are still living too much with the idea that we can get back to what it was before. Since Liberation Day, we are liberated from one sole thing, how we did trade before. And everything else is, for all of us, experts or not, just an opinion, because the future will decide. I really, really urge everyone to consider carefully what matters most. What is the make or break of your business? And every time that it pops up, business in America, think not twice, but 3 times. Because you cannot do business with a partner that changes its mind every day. The world is much bigger than the States. There are many other markets. It will take time. It will take effort. It might have a dip in the numbers of GDP growth for Vietnam. It might be an impact like our members predict of about 20% on our results for the next years to come. But we will not die. We will not let our production platforms that we build up here in vain. They are worthy of their own space. And I believe that's what we should monetize in the near future.
Thank you, Bruno. Today may not be Liberation Day, but it's time to liberate this panel. Thanks for sharing your candid thoughts, and thanks to all of you for being with us. At Eurocham, we'll continue to deliver our mission, which is to be a bridge between European businesses and Vietnam, and we'll continue to foster dialogues for sustainable trade, fair trade.
Thank you for our moderator. First time ever on behalf of Eurocham, Chi Mai. And for all those trying to escape the room, there's another room filled of white books, and that white book is 1 floor down, but don't worry, it doesn't mean that the discussion level goes down. So I all invite you kindly to come and listen to what Vietnam can do as a country to actually become a better investment destination. Thank you.